Hello Internet, this is Brian Holland. This is the first video in a series called Muse-Day Tuesday, where I discuss RPG topics. These musings are my own opinions and thoughts crafted from my own experiences. Take from it what you will, and it's fine if you disagree with me. If you do, let's discuss it in the comments like adults. In my first Worldbuilding Wednesday video, I demonstrated how I used a couple different tools for world building in Dungeon World. In this musing, I'll discuss why I use the tools I use, and why my method is relevant for any role-playing game. If you're interested in hearing my musings about collaborative world building, please stick around. Alright, I've added a card in the upper right corner linking my Worldbuilding Wednesday playlist so you can click on it at any time. One of the reasons I'm drawn to Dungeon World is that it has no built-in setting. It's designed to be played with collaborative world building. There are some pros and cons that go along with this, and I'll start with the pros. Number 1, as the GM, you don't have to learn the details of a published setting. Number 2, you don't have to create a setting. Now, a lot of GMs like doing this, and I used to be one of them. So if that's your thing, by all means just keep doing that. But I know from experience that one of two things happen when I try to build my own setting. I either never finish it, or I do, but my players don't read it. Both points 1 and 2 mean that you don't have to try to convey setting to your players. When you build the world together, both the GM and the players learn the setting at the same time. And that makes it easier to build characters that fit into the world naturally. Finally, each time you play, you can build a completely new setting together, or continue to flesh out an existing one. I come back to a familiar setting with my face-to-face group occasionally, sometimes several years after their character's last foray into that world. The stories of the previous characters are the past, and they love it when they meet an older version of a beloved character. Now on to the cons. Some players just don't want to have a hand in building setting and world. And that's totally fine. For a very long time in RPGs, it's always been up to the game master to bring all of the setting and story to the table. Your setting may never be as deep as a published setting. But is that really a con? Not really, at least not for me. I have several published settings on my shelf that I've only ever scratched the surface of, and some I've only ever read. Now, just because you play a rule set that doesn't use collaborative world building doesn't mean you can't implement this at your table. You can play D&D 5e without setting it in the Forgotten Realms, Greyhawk, Ravenloft, Eberron, or any of the other published settings. Take whatever rules you like to play with, but then build the world together with your players. So that's why I like collaborative world building. Now let me explain why I use the tools I use. Let me break the method down into its 4 tools, which I'll discuss briefly, and then I'll talk about each more in depth. The first tool is inspiration. Some people can pull awesomeness out of thin air, but I'm not one of those people. I usually like to combine 3 different sources of inspiration, but I'm going to try to stick to just 2 for my Worldbuilding Wednesday videos. One of the sources will change up now and then, but the second will most likely always be the same, and I'll explain that when I get to that segment. Second is the essential element. This is the entire goal of my world building method. When I get to this segment, I'll talk about the term's origins and how I define it now, and why I think it's such an important tool. Next come the world building questions. These are what allow collaborative world building. In this segment, I'll discuss where these questions come from, as well as a pitfall to avoid when using this tool. The final tool is the party dynamic. Now, if you've played Dungeon World, you'll know that these terms aren't native to that game. So what does that mean? Well, again, it means that you don't have to be playing Dungeon World to use this method and its tools. Alright, so let's talk about inspiration. I don't know what inspires you. I only know what inspires me. Take whatever it is that inspires you and use it. That could be video games, movies, books, music. In the 6th issue of my Dungeon World zine, Session 0, one of my sources of inspiration was a Metallica song. In my first Worldbuilding Wednesday video, I used The Legend of Zelda as a source. That's a well I'll draw from often. Why? Because it inspires me. Another source that I will probably always use is the Magic the Gathering card database. Right now there are over 20,000 unique Magic cards. A YouTube channel I watch about solo gaming is Geek Gamers, and I'll link her channel in the description below. Something she said a few times in her videos, and I'm paraphrasing here, is that random tables aren't random. They're curated tables of things from which you can make a selection at random. When I do a search on the Gatherer, I'm curating a small subset of those 20,000 unique cards from which I'll select a few that I like. Combine and extrapolate your sources. Twist them and mix them up and see what comes out, as I did in the Dead King video. Now let's move on to the essential element. My friend Logan Howard of the Swordbreaker Zine, linked below, coined this term when I was asking his advice about making a Final Fantasy VII-like setting for Dungeon World. He said, let's look at the essential elements. And you know how a light bulb goes off in your head when you get an idea? Well, this was like a sun bursting in my brain. Essential element. Thanks, Logan. We added all kinds of things to the list that were essential to Final Fantasy VII, but the term has morphed a little bit since that time. Now I define an essential element as an element of the setting that is essential to the player's understanding of that setting. And that has a really cool side effect. If it's that essential, then it's an element that's essential for the character's understanding of the world as well, meaning they're going to know it. That doesn't mean the characters need to know all the secrets of the element. They can know that the Dead King murdered the heads of the noble families because that's essential to the understanding of the state of the world. They don't need to know that it was Gregor Moldave, the eldest son of the wealthiest noble family, who set all that in motion so he could inherit the family fortune early. Let them discover that in play. There's a measure of scale involved with essential elements too. In that example, the essential element was about a big bad evil guy and it has some far-ranging world-building considerations. But you might make an essential element about a city, or the fact that elves live in communities on the backs of enormous treants that slowly roam the world. Essential elements should be self-contained. They shouldn't rely on another element to make sense. That doesn't mean you can't combine those elements, though. Essential elements should also be short, 2 or 3 sentences or a short paragraph. This brevity is important and powerful because it gives you and your players something to build upon. Which leads us to world-building questions. While writing an essential element, you're going to ask all kinds of questions. Here's the pitfall I warned you about. You're going to want to answer all those questions. Don't do it. Fight the urge to answer these questions and just write them down instead. This is what's going to make the process collaborative. When you sit down with your players during, guess what, a session 0, you'll present the essential element, which is a nice, compact element essential to their understanding of the world, and then you'll ask them the questions you've written down. Together, you and your players will flesh out this setting based on the answers they give, and then build characters that fit in that world. Which transitions nicely into the final tool, the party dynamic. As I mentioned earlier, this is not a Dungeon World term. I used the term in my one-page Dungeon World campaign starter, linked below, and I like the sound of it. It's meant to describe how the party is connected and with what sort of quests they're engaged in a very small package. It helps get the game moving right away because you already know why the characters are together and what they're doing. An example from my generator, using the word you to mean the party, reads, "You are fervent inquisitors of the blank, attempting to acquire rare alchemical ingredients for blank." You can either fill in those blanks with setting information drawn from your essential element, or let the players fill them in. In my first world building video, I didn't leave any blanks in the party dynamic, but doing so is just another way to grow the setting while grabbing investment from your players at the same time. You don't have to be a slave to the party dynamic you create either. If your players come up with something better, then take it and run with it. Never forget, your players will love the story all the more if it's their story. Let it be their story. I've talked about why I like collaborative world building, how you can accomplish it, and touched a little bit on its importance. But I want to stress a final point about why collaborative world building is such an important tool. By collaborating with your players, you'll infuse story elements into your game that you didn't think of, and maybe would have never thought of. Offload some of that world building to them, combine your thoughts with theirs, and you'll never run out of worlds and settings in which to play. So that's it. Those are my musings about collaborative world building. Regardless of what game you're playing, give it a try with your gaming group. I think you'll see some fun results. If you can't come up with your own essential elements, I'll eventually have enough of them from my Worldbuilding Wednesday series to create a curated table on which you can select a few at random. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. If you like my content, please share and subscribe and hit the bell icon so you get notifications of my new videos. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.